Hello, my name is Reiko Osoroshi. On this channel, I introduce Japanese ghost stories. Today's ghost stories are presented in 4 parts: the 8-foot figure, evil eye, things coming from the sea, and Wriggle. Hachisaku-sama. My father's hometown is about a little less than 2 hours by car from our home. It's a farmhouse, and I've always liked that kind of atmosphere. When I got into high school and started riding my motorcycle, I often went there alone during summer and winter breaks. My grandparents would welcome me with joy, saying, "You've come again." However, the last time I went there was just before I entered my 3rd year of high school, so it's been over 10 years since I last visited. It's not that I didn't go, but rather that I couldn't go, and the reason for that is as follows. Right after spring break had started, I was tempted by the nice weather to ride my motorcycle to my grandparents' house. It was still a bit chilly, but the Ingawa veranda was comfortably warm, so I relaxed there for a while. And then, po-po, po-pop-po, po-pop, I heard a strange sound. It wasn't mechanical, it felt like a person was making the sound. It was a kind of muffled sound, like both a voiced and a semi-voiced sound at the same time. Wondering what it was, I noticed a hat on top of the hedge in the garden. It wasn't placed there, the hat seemed to move on its own. As it moved to the gap in the hedge, a woman came into view. Well, the hat was on her head. She was wearing a whitish dress. However, the hedge was about 2 meters high. How tall must that woman be to poke her head out from there? I was surprised, and then the woman moved again and disappeared from view. The hat disappeared too. Also, without me realizing, the po-po-po-po sound had stopped. At the time, I just thought it might have been a really tall woman wearing platform shoes or a tall man in high-heeled shoes cross-dressing. Later, while having tea in the living room, I told my grandparents about what I had seen. I saw a tall woman just now. Maybe a man dressed as a woman? They only responded with a casual, "Oh." But when I said, she was taller than the hedge, wearing a hat and making strange, po-po-po-po, noises, their movements suddenly stopped. I mean, they literally froze. Afterward, they bombarded me with questions like, "When did you see this? Where did you see it? And, how much taller was she than the hedge?" My grandfather, with a stern look, asked me these questions while his intensity made me answer. Then, suddenly, he fell silent and went to the hallway to make a call on the telephone there. Since the sliding door was closed, I couldn't tell what he was saying. My grandmother seemed to be trembling slightly. After finishing the call, Grandpa returned and said, "Stay overnight today. No, it's no longer possible to send you back today." I wondered if I had done something terribly wrong. I desperately thought, but couldn't recall anything. That woman, she came to see me, not the other way around, so. Then, he said, "Boss-san, please take care of things here. I'll go pick up Mr. K." And he left in his pickup truck. I asked Grandma hesitantly, "What happened to Grandpa?" She replied in a trembling voice, "Seems like he got entranced by Hachisaku-sama. Your grandpa will take care of it. You don't need to worry about anything." After that, Grandma spoke intermittently until Grandpa returned. Around here, there's a troublesome thing called Hachisaku-sama. Hachisaku-sama appears as a tall woman. As the name suggests, she's about 8 shaku, about 2.4 meters tall. She makes a strange laughter-like sound, like "baba-bobo," in a manly voice. Depending on the person, she might appear as a young woman in mourning clothes, an elderly woman in formal kimono, or a middle-aged woman in everyday clothing. However, what's common among all sightings is that she's unusually tall for a woman, and she has something on her head, along with that eerie laughing voice. There are rumors from the past that she used to possess travelers, but it's not confirmed. She's sealed away by a Jizo statue in this area, now part of City X, previously Village Y, and she doesn't go elsewhere. If one becomes entranced by Hachisaku-sama, they will be killed within a few days. The most recent incident involving Hachisaku-sama was about 15 years ago. This is what I heard later, but the reason why she's sealed by the Jizo statue is because there's a limited path she can take to move elsewhere. They enshrined the Jizo statue at the village boundary along that path. It's said that there are 4 of these seal points at the boundaries in the north, south, east, and west. This was perhaps due to some agreements with surrounding villages, maybe prioritizing water rights or something. Hearing all this, it didn't feel real at all. Of course, it wouldn't. Eventually, Grandpa returned with an elderly woman. Things have gotten quite serious. "Hold on to this for now," said the old lady named Mr. K as she handed me a protective amulet. Then, Grandpa and I went upstairs together and did something. Grandma stayed with us the whole time. Even when I went to the bathroom, she insisted on staying outside with the door partially open. It was only then that I started to think, this might be really bad. After a while, I was led upstairs and into a room. All the windows were covered with newspapers, with protective amulets attached on top, and salt was placed in the corners. There was also a wooden box-like structure, not exactly an altar, with a small Buddha statue on it. And somehow, they had even prepared 2 chamber pots. So I guess they wanted me to use these. The sun will set soon. Listen carefully, you must not leave here until tomorrow morning. Neither I nor Ba-san will call you or speak to you. Yes, until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, you absolutely must not leave here. Once it's 7, you can leave. We will inform your family, Grandpa said with a serious expression, and there was nothing for me to do but nod in silence. Make sure you follow what you've been told. Keep the protective amulet close to you. If something happens, pray before the Buddha, Mr. K added in a trembling voice. Although I was allowed to watch TV, my mind was preoccupied and I couldn't focus on the show. The onigiri and snacks that Grandma gave me when I was confined to the room didn't appeal to me at all. I left them untouched and wrapped myself in a futon, shivering nervously. In that state, I must have fallen asleep without realizing it. When I woke up, there was some late-night program playing on TV, and looking at my clock, it was past 1 in the morning. This was before I had a mobile phone. Thinking about how I woke up at such an unpleasant time, I heard a tapping sound on the window glass. It wasn't the sound of pebbles hitting the glass, more like a light tapping with fingers. I couldn't tell if it was because of the wind or if someone was actually tapping, but I desperately tried to convince myself that it was just the wind. I tried to calm down and took a sip of tea, but I was still scared. I turned up the TV volume and forced myself to watch. At that moment, I heard Grandpa's voice. "Hey, are you okay? If you're scared, you don't have to force yourself." I instinctively moved closer to the door, but I quickly recalled Grandpa's words. Then I heard the voice again. "What's wrong? Come over here if you want." It sounded remarkably like Grandpa's voice, but it wasn't his voice. I didn't know why, but that's how I felt, and the moment I thought that, I got goosebumps all over my body. I looked at the mound of salt in the corner, and the top part had turned black. I rushed to sit in front of the Buddha statue, clutching the protective amulet, and began to pray desperately, saying, "Please help me." At that moment, po pa po, po, po po. That voice resounded, and the window glass started making tapping sounds again. I knew she wasn't very tall, but the image of her reaching up from below and tapping on the window glass couldn't leave my mind. All I could do now was to pray before the Buddha. The night felt unbelievably long, but morning eventually came. The TV, which had been left on, was now showing the morning news. The time displayed in the corner of the screen was indeed 7:13 a.m. The tapping on the glass and that voice had stopped without me realizing. It seemed like I had either fallen asleep or passed out. The mound of salt had turned even darker. Just to be sure, when I checked my own watch, it showed the same time, so I cautiously opened the door. There, I saw Grandma and Mr. K with worried expressions. Grandma was teary-eyed, saying, "I'm so glad, I'm so glad." When I went downstairs, Dad was there too. Grandpa poked his head out from outside and urged, "Get in the car quickly." When I stepped out into the yard, there was a van, a one-box type, parked there. And there were several men in the yard. The one-box van could seat 9 people, so I was seated in the middle of the middle row, with Mr. K in the passenger seat. The men from the yard also got in, filling up the van. There were a total of 9 people inside, surrounding me from all sides. We're in a serious situation. It might be unsettling, but from now on, close your eyes and look down. We can't see anything, but you will. Endure it until I say it's okay to open your eyes, said a man in his 50s sitting on my right. Then, Grandpa's pickup truck led the way, followed by the van I was in, and Dad's car at the back. The convoy started moving, going at a considerably slow pace. It probably wasn't even going 20 kilometers per hour. Before long, Mr. K muttered, "This is where we need to brace ourselves," and began reciting something like a sutra. Po papo, po, papo. That voice resounded again. Clutching the amulet Mr. K had given me and following his instructions, I closed my eyes and looked down, but for some reason, I opened my eyes just a crack and glanced outside. What I saw was a white-ish dress. It seemed to be moving in tandem with the car. Was it keeping pace with us in that wide stride of hers? Her head was outside the window, out of sight. However, it seemed like she was trying to peek into the car, as she began to lower her head. Unintentionally, I let out a small, eek. The person next to me snapped, "Don't look." Panicking, I tightly closed my eyes and gripped the amulet even harder. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of glass being tapped began. The people around me made short sounds like, "Ha," or, Even though they couldn't see her and couldn't hear the voice, they could hear the sound. Mr. K's recitation grew stronger. Eventually, when the voice and sound stopped, Mr. K exclaimed, "We made it through." The men surrounding us, who had been silent until then, let out relieved sighs. Eventually, the cars stopped in a wide area of the road, and I was transferred to Dad's car. As Dad and Grandpa lowered their heads to the other men, Mr. K approached and said, "Show me the amulet." Unconsciously, I looked at the amulet I had been clutching, and it had turned somewhat dark. Mr. K said, "I think you'll be okay now, but just to be safe, hold on to this for a while," and handed me a new amulet. Afterwards, my dad and I returned home together. The motorcycle was brought back later by Grandpa and some neighbors. It seemed my dad also knew about the Hachisaku lady. When he was a child, one of his friends had been enthralled by her and lost his life. He mentioned knowing people who had been affected and had to move elsewhere. The men who rode in the van were all somehow related to Grandpa's family, meaning they were distantly related to me as well. Grandpa led the convoy, and Dad followed behind, both using their familial connection to try and deceive the Hachisaku lady, even just a bit. Dad's brother, my uncle, who couldn't come here overnight, didn't have as close a blood relation, but people who could gather quickly were called upon. Still, having 7 men around at this very moment was impossible. It was deemed safer during the day than at night, so I was confined to my room overnight. They were prepared, even if it meant Grandpa or Dad becoming a substitute if things took a turn for the worst. I was then explained the things I mentioned earlier, and they emphasized that I should never go there again. Upon returning home, when I talked to Grandpa on the phone, he asked if I had heard a voice that night. I hadn't, and he insisted that he hadn't called me. Just as I suspected. That thought sent shivers down my spine once again. It's said that the victims of the Hachisaku lady are often young people, especially children. When young individuals or children are in a state of extreme anxiety, hearing such things from a family member's voice might make them let their guard down. 10 years passed, and when I had almost forgotten about it, a chilling follow-up story unfolded. The Jizo statue that sealed the Hachisaku lady has been destroyed by someone. It's the one that's on the road leading to your house, Grandma told me over the phone. Grandpa had passed away 2 years ago, and of course, I wasn't allowed to attend his funeral. He had even instructed that I shouldn't be brought to the funeral after he became bedridden. Even though I now consider it superstition, I can't help feeling quite concerned. What if I hear that voice again? Popapo. It echoes in my mind. Evil Eye. This is a story from when I was 14 years old. During winter vacation, I had the opportunity to visit my uncle's cottage even though he was still in his 30s. He apparently wanted to go with his girlfriend, but since they had recently broken up, he invited me instead. We had always been close since I was a child, so I happily agreed to go. My uncle lived in the same city as me, and he came to pick me up early in the morning. We departed right away. My uncle was quite stylish and had always taught me various games, outdoor activities, and music, so I looked up to him. The journey was quite long, about 8 hours one way by car, but we made it enjoyable by chatting, listening to music, taking breaks along the way, and even making detours. Eventually, we arrived near our destination and bought dinner ingredients from a supermarket. Then, we drove up a steep mountain road to reach the cottage. It wasn't very large, but it had a stylish and secluded feel, like a hidden wooden lodge. There were 2 or 3 other cottages visible down the slope, but it seemed like no one was around. We had a barbecue dinner in the yard. The meat was relatively cheap, but it tasted amazing when grilled over charcoal. We also grilled offal, seafood, and vegetables. We cooked white rice in a pot, and it was the best dinner ever. After eating, we went to a room with a fireplace, watched TV, played PlayStation, Super Nintendo, and my uncle even showed me some racy videos that left quite an impression on me back then. As the night grew late, we started sharing scary stories. My uncle was skilled in this area as well, and his stories were truly frightening. If there's a chance, I'd like to share some of those stories too. Suddenly, as if remembering something, my uncle muttered, "Don't ever go into the back mountain." Apparently, even the locals rarely ventured there. It was said that they could find matsutake mushrooms there, among other things. Maybe it's unrelated, but he mentioned, the president of a nearby cottage died in the back mountain in the past. Well, I thought, if I hear creepy things like that, I'll definitely avoid going there. After all the fun, we partied until around 5 in the early morning and finally went to sleep. I woke up as sunlight streamed into the room. It was already past noon, around 12 o'clock. Feeling thirsty, I decided to go downstairs to get some water. I glanced into my uncle's room on the way and saw him snoring, still asleep. It was cold, but the morning felt incredibly pleasant. Indeed, the mountain air was completely different from the city. I returned to my room and stepped out onto the balcony, taking a seat in a chair. The view directly faced the back mountain. It appeared to be an ordinary mountain, nothing special. Suddenly, I remembered that there was a telescope in the room. I felt like admiring the natural scenery, so I brought the telescope out onto the balcony. Being a high-performance and high-quality device, it offered a clear view of even distant landscapes. While the town was visible far away, I was amazed that I could even see birds perched on trees in the surrounding mountains. I must have been lost in observation for about 30 minutes when something moving caught my eye while I was gazing at the trees on the back mountain. It looked like a person, with their back facing me. Their head was smooth, and they were shaking their entire body vigorously. A local resident, perhaps? Dancing? They held a sickle in their hand. What was unusual, however, was that they were completely naked despite the freezing winter. Could it be some kind of festival? But there was only one person. My thoughts were a jumble, and various scenarios raced through my mind. Since they were facing away from me, I couldn't see their face. I shouldn't watch this anymore, I instinctively felt. It seemed like a human, but something was off about them. They seemed a little strange. However, my curiosity got the better of me. I maximized the zoom of the telescope. A smooth back of the head, its color was white. At that moment, a shiver ran down my spine. The figure turned around slowly while still dancing. Their face had a semblance of humanity, with a nose and a mouth. But what was unsettling was the absence of eyebrows, and their single eye was positioned vertically between their brows. My body trembled. One eye. Through the telescope lens, our gazes met. They twisted their mouth into a grin. Ah! I screamed the moment our eyes locked. Tears streamed down my face. Overwhelming emotions akin to an abnormal depression surged through me. I dashed around the room in a half-mad state. My uncle burst into the room. What's wrong? A monster. What? Telescope. Back mountain. My uncle peered into the telescope. He emitted an inaudible groan and clutched his head, crying with snot dripping down. A bit calmer than before, I asked, "What is that thing?" "Oh," my uncle wailed while sobbing. I realized this was serious, and for the first time in my life, I slapped someone across the face. My uncle shook slightly. 10 seconds, 20 seconds. He finally looked at me. That's an evil gaze. Listen, in the drawer of my desk, there are sunglasses. Get them and also get a pair for yourself. Why? Just do it. I handed my uncle the sunglasses as instructed. With trembling hands, he put on the sunglasses and peered through the telescope. He moved the telescope around for a while. "Ah," he groaned and gestured me over. "Put on the sunglasses and take a look." Tentatively, I put on the sunglasses and looked through the telescope. The image was blurry, but I locked eyes with the figure among the trees. A feeling of unease washed over me again, though not as strongly as before. But my heartbeat raced abnormally. Wait, this isn't the same location. The figure was performing a bizarre dance, moving like jelly. And their gaze was fixed directly on me. Were they coming down the mountain? Could it be? They're coming this way? Are you going to the bathroom? What? At a time like this? If you are, there's an empty plastic bottle in the dining room. Pee in it and bring it back." Saying this, my uncle went downstairs. I was too stunned to move. A few minutes later, he returned with a plastic bottle filled with yellow liquid. "If you need to go, use this," he said and handed me another empty plastic bottle. "But seriously, what is that thing?" "Mountain. Yamako. Don't know. When I was a kid, my father and I used to go camping in the mountains, but it wasn't there, was it? Strange things happen in the mountains. Even at night, you can hear people talking outside the tent, but there's no one there. When we scattered pee or something, it oddly stopped." Saying this, my uncle looked through the telescope once again. He observed the figure while groaning and straining. "It moves very slowly, like at what speed, I don't know. It disappeared from view halfway. But it's undoubtedly heading towards this lodge. Then, let's quickly drive back. It's probably useless. Unless we can divert its attention away from us. It will likely keep pursuing us. This is some kind of curse. The one you mentioned earlier. But why do you know so much about it?" "When I was working, I had a temporary stay in a town in Northern Europe." "Well, let's talk about it if we survive." "We survive? You mean we're staying here until that thing comes?" "No, we'll confront it. I thought it would be best to stay holed up here, but my uncle's opinion was to deal with it before it gets to the lodge. While I felt that escaping would be a better choice than venturing near that terrifying creature. My uncle had always been a reliable person, and I respected him. I decided to follow his lead. Each of us carried sunglasses, plastic bottles, a light supply of food in a backpack, binoculars, a wooden bat, and a flashlight. We headed into the back mountain. It was my uncle's belief that we should try to resolve this before it got dark. Could I withstand that creature's gaze? Not through the telescope, but up close, even with the sunglasses on? Various anxieties raced through my mind. Although it was called the back mountain, it was quite vast. We used binoculars to search for the creature. According to my uncle, the creature would likely be moving towards us, and eventually, we would encounter it. We couldn't risk staying out too long as it grew dark, so we settled in a slightly open area about 500 meters from the lodge to lay in ambush. "We just need to divert its interest." "Just its interest," my uncle said. "How?" "My idea is to get closer to it no matter what. But never make direct eye contact. Look at it from an angle. Understand what I'm saying? Look slightly away from its gaze and focus your sight elsewhere. Then, throw the collected urine at it. If that doesn't work, are you ready for this? I'm being serious. We'll show it our genitals." "Huh? An evil gaze despises impure things. So, we won't harm it, but if we can drive it away with that, we might survive. And if that doesn't work? Then we run. Get in the car and leave immediately." With indescribable fear and anxiety, my uncle and I sat on a rock, waiting. We took turns watching through the binoculars. It was around 4 in the morning. "Hey, wake up." I heard the voice of my younger brother, who died in an accident when I was 10. "Hey, wake up. You'll be late for school." "Shut up. Give me 3 more minutes of sleep." "Hey, wake up or you'll die." I jolted awake. Was I asleep? Impossible. In the midst of that fear and tension. Was I put to sleep? I looked at my uncle beside me. He was sleeping. I woke him up urgently. He sprang up. He checked his wristwatch. 5:30. It was almost completely dark around us. Cold sweat streamed down. "Can you hear that?" "Huh?" The voice. "Singing?" Concentrating hard, I strained my ears, and from about several meters to the right, I could hear a voice. It was coming closer. The singing had the cadence of a folk song. I couldn't understand the words, but it was eerie and high-pitched. The feeling of dread was overpowering, as if everything in the world was becoming distasteful just from hearing that voice. "Listen up. Just illuminate the ground in front of you," my uncle shouted, and I shone my flashlight on the area beneath the bushes where the creature was likely to emerge. I saw its feet, hairless and strangely white. It slithered towards us, moving its entire body. The eerie singing. For a moment, my thoughts were interrupted. Ah! Eek! The creature crouched down on all fours, its face now where the flashlight beam was focused on its feet. I accidentally made direct eye contact. The same emotions as during the daytime washed over me again. My uncle overturned his bottle, tears streaming down his face. The fallen flashlight illuminated the creature's body. It approached us on all fours, singing a disturbing and incomprehensible song, moving in a manner reminiscent of a newborn foal. In its right hand was a rusty sickle. I thought it was all over. Just then, ring, ring, ring. My uncle's phone rang. My uncle, who had been sobbing, seemed to snap out of it, pulled out his phone from his pocket, and looked at it. I couldn't believe what he was doing at a time like this, and in the dim light, I stared at him in astonishment. The phone was still ringing. Ring. My uncle continued to stare at the phone. The creature was coming towards me. I was so terrified I was nearly incontinent. I felt hopeless. Then, my uncle let out a thunderous roar. He picked up the fallen flashlight from the ground, rushed towards me, and snatched my plastic bottle. "Don't look over here. Close your eyes because the light's on its face." I scrambled on the ground, my sunglasses slipping down. I clutched my head and closed my eyes, trying to shut out the terrifying sight. From here on, I learned the story from my uncle later. First, he illuminated the creature's face and located it outside his direct line of sight. It's a bit of a dirty story, but he put the mouth of my plastic bottle to his lips. Took something from inside the bottle into his mouth, all the while keeping the light on the creature's face. Then, he squatted down and blew toward the creature's face with his eyes closed, like blowing mist. A sound akin to a horse's whinny, but more disturbing, echoed. He repeated the process, blowing, directly into the creature's eyes. That horrendous singing seemed even more intense. But it was still there. In desperation, my uncle apparently took off his pants and underwear, using his own tool to direct the flashlight beam at the creature. The creature must have seen it. It spewed out incomprehensible words, curses filled with intense resentment, and then turned away from them. I had lifted my face by that point. My uncle's flashlight illuminated the creature's back. What was terrifying was that even when retreating, the creature continued its eerie singing, its body writhing. Moving slowly, excruciatingly slowly, as if it were the pace of an elderly person using a cane. We stared at its back, illuminated by the light, until it disappeared from sight. We walked back to the lodge in silence, without exchanging a word, lost in our own thoughts. Once inside, my uncle checked that all the doors were locked and made coffee. While sipping the coffee, he finally spoke. "So, did it work, distracting its attention, as you said, Uncle?" "Well, probably. I mean, that thing shriveled up pitifully after the encounter with my uncle chuckled wryly. Then, he began to speak hesitantly about the curse. Due to his job, my uncle often travels overseas by ship. I can't go into detail, but he's what you'd call a technical engineer. One day, during his stay in a certain town in Northern Europe, he was told by a fellow technician, whom he had befriended and who was also an interpreter, that he had something interesting to show him. My uncle was taken to a deserted alleyway. He was led into a shabby, small house in the alley. Inside, the contrast was stark. Despite the shabby exterior, the interior of the house was quite different. The carpets, ornaments, and precious metals were clearly high quality. The room was also scented with pleasant fragrances. Without fully understanding what was happening, my uncle's attention was drawn to a small back room. There, in the candlelight, sat a man who appeared to be in his 60s. What was odd was that despite being indoors at night, the man was wearing sunglasses. According to the local man, this man was a possessor of evil eye. The evil eye is a type of folk belief, a superstition widely spread around the world. It suggests that by staring at someone with malice, the person can cast a curse on the target, causing them harm. Depending on the power of the curse, the victim can fall ill, weaken, and eventually even die. My uncle initially took this with a grain of salt, thinking that the man was some sort of magician or illusionist. The man whispered something to the local man, who then relayed it to my uncle. The man said, "Since you seem skeptical, let me give you a taste of my power." My uncle agreed, thinking it might be a bit of fun. The man whispered to the local guy again, "I'm going to bind you. Please understand, I'm doing this because my power is strong. You might struggle, but I'll only look into your eyes for a brief moment. That's all I'll do." My uncle suspected that the man might be using some terrifying trick on him or that the incense might have some kind of hypnotic effect. Although he resisted being bound, since his local friend was trustworthy, he agreed. The man approached my bound uncle. The local man turned away. The man calmly removed his sunglasses and looked down at my uncle. "You know, when I saw it today, it was just like this." Placing the coffee cup on the table, my uncle mumbled, "As soon as I saw it, I felt like my mind was breaking. The eyes were just normal, ordinary eyes. Yet somehow, everything in the world seemed repugnant. The gaze lasted just 1 or 2 seconds. I don't think this is something like suggestion or hypnosis. It's on a different level." According to his friend, this evil eye man would do anything if paid enough. My uncle also heard that he was being used in the territorial battles among the local mafia. About a week before my uncle was due to return home, news came that the man with the evil eye had passed away. He had apparently messed with the wrong people and done some work that ruined the reputation of his organization. His body was found on the floor, covered in excrement and urine, and his eyes had been gouged out. As I mentioned earlier, the evil eye abhors impurity. I wonder if that's why it couldn't stand even while being smeared with filth, my uncle said. I had no energy to utter a single word. I just listened. Could the creature from earlier also have been a possessor of the evil eye? As if reading my thoughts, my uncle continued, "Whether that thing was truly a monster or just a person brought up that way, I don't know. But I felt that running away from it wasn't enough. That's why I confronted it with all my might. You know, even kappas are said to dislike human spittle. Surprisingly, the human body might be more effective against creatures like that than sutras or charms." While listening to his story, I recalled my brother's dream and mentioned it to my uncle. I wondered if my brother had helped us. I was crying. My uncle listened solemnly, and we stayed silent for about a minute. Eventually, he spoke again. "That could be possible. Your brother was more level-headed than you, after all. Do you remember when my phone rang? It was her, you know, my girlfriend. But, you see, there's no way a phone signal would work around these mountains. Look, there isn't a single bar of signal right now, is there? So, perhaps that's another possibility. Let's head down the mountain right away. I'll sell this lodge too. I want to call her as soon as possible, my uncle said, blushing slightly, finishing his coffee, and then standing up. Something coming from the sea. One of my usually friendly colleagues, for some reason, stubbornly refuses to go to the sea. When I asked for the reason, he seemed unwilling to talk, so I got him drunk and pried the story out of him. From here on, his account. However, since he was quite intoxicated and his story was somewhat incoherent, I'm presenting it in a more organized manner. Back when I was still a student, my friend and I set out on a trip. I remember it was after the late-term exams, so it was winter. It wasn't a typical journey though. We just hopped into a van with my friend's beloved dog and drove around aimlessly, carefree. Somewhere around the nth day, we reached a cold village by the seaside. The sun had already set. It was a small settlement nestled between the mountains and the sea, as if clinging to the gaps between them. Unfortunately, our gasoline was running worryingly low as we drove along the coastal road in search of a gas station. We did find one, but it was already closed. We decided to try the back entrance. Hanging from the eaves near the entrance was a large sieve. I thought it was obstructing the passage, so I pushed it aside and rang the doorbell. "Excuse me. Could you help us with some gasoline?" I sensed a faint presence, but there was no response. Are they just ignoring us? This is really annoying. Let's try again. "Excuse me." We persistently called out. The light inside the entrance turned on, and a figure appeared behind the glass door. "Who's there? We need some gas. We're closed today." Before I could finish speaking, an impatient voice answered. "Well, maybe if you just..." "No, we can't open today." There was no room for negotiation. We gave up and returned to the car. This is why the countryside is no good. Well, can't be helped. Let's sleep here tonight. As a reminder, let's get some gas first thing in the morning. We looked for a place to park the car and ended up wandering around the village. Not only the gas station but all the shops and houses were closed. On closer inspection, we noticed that each house had a basket or a sieve hanging outside. Could it be some kind of festival? It's surprisingly quiet. The wind is unbearable. Oh, we can't park here. It was the base of a flight of stone steps that stretched straight from a small shrine on the mountainside down to the sea. It was a small parking lot with a fence that could shield us from the sea breeze. We parked the car in the shade of the shrine's torii gate, and the surroundings had already plunged into darkness. We grumbled as we wrapped ourselves in blankets and drifted off to sleep in the driver's seat. I woke up from the dog's growling after some hours. I then noticed the overpowering stench in the air. The dog was baring its teeth and growling at the sea. It was usually a gentle creature, but no matter how much we tried to calm it down, it remained restless. My friend also woke up and stared into the darkness. The moonlit sea, which had been calm until a while ago, now seemed eerily still. Something was moving at the edge of a concrete pier. What's that? I can't tell, but it's oddly quiet. The wind is so strong. Oh, we can't park there. It was a small parking lot, but the hedge shielded us from the sea breeze. We parked the car in the shadow of the torii gate, and there was nothing left to do in the dark. Wrapped in blankets, we fell asleep in the driver's seat. I woke up after a few hours, jolted by the dog's growls. I then noticed the pungent smell in the air. The dog was snarling at the sea, its gaze fixed on something. It's usually a docile creature, but it remained agitated no matter how we tried to soothe it. My friend also woke up, and we both strained our eyes into the darkness. The moonlit sea, which had been calm just moments ago, now looked eerily still. Something was writhing at the edge of a concrete pier. What's that? I don't know, but it's oddly quiet. The wind is unbearable. Oh, we can't park here. We searched for a place to park the car, and this time we found a spot where we could be shielded from the sea breeze. We parked in the shadow of the Torii gate, and there was nothing to do in the darkness. Wrapped in blankets, we slept in the driver's seat. After some hours, I was awoken by the dog's growls. I then noticed the overpowering stench in the air. The dog was snarling toward the sea, its teeth bared. While it was usually calm, it showed no sign of calming down this time. My friend also woke up and stared into the darkness. The moonlit sea, which had been calm earlier, was now eerily tranquil. Something was crawling on the edge of a concrete pier. What's that? I don't know. At first, it looked like a thick pipe or a log crawling out of the sea. It seemed to be slowly making its way onto land, wriggling like a snake. But strangely, there was no sound. Instead, its body resembled a black, billowing mass of smoke, and it was hard to tell if it even had a physical form. But what was clear was a continuous, eerie ringing in our ears, like a whispering wind or a faint wail, that had been going on since the thing appeared. The overpowering stench had gotten worse, making us almost nauseous. The object's end that was on the coast had already reached the opposite house, stretching across the coastal road. However, the other end was still submerged in the sea. Here's the English translation. The tip that seemed to peer into the eaves of the houses, while not entirely clear, unmistakably held a shape resembling a face. Neither I nor my friend would consider ourselves particularly timid, but the creature's appearance could only be described as ominous. From the moment I saw it, my body tensed up, and I couldn't move. It's like having your heart gripped by an eagle. I suppose that's how it feels. The creature was fixated on the sieve hanging from the eaves, but eventually, it slowly began to move and headed towards the next house. Hey, start the car. My friend's trembling voice snapped me back to my senses. I managed to raise my unresponsive arm and turned the key, breaking the silence with the roar of the engine. The creature slowly turned to face us. Dangerous. I didn't quite understand why, but I had an intuitive sense not to meet its gaze. Focusing only on the road ahead, I slammed on the accelerator, causing the car to shoot forward. The dog in the backseat, which had started barking like crazy, let out a wheezing sound and collapsed with a thud. Taro, my friend, who had turned around, gasped and froze in place. You idiot, don't look back. In a frantic state, I grabbed my friend's shoulder and pulled them back to face forward. When my friend turned back, their face was contorted and twisted, their eyes completely unfocused. It's embarrassing to admit, but in the face of the unknown terror, I continued to scream and step on the accelerator. From then on, we kept driving the same road until we ran out of gas and crossed over the mountain pass. We welcomed the morning without the slightest relief. However, my friend's consciousness was clouded, and they were hospitalized at a nearby hospital, bedridden with a high fever for about a week. Even after recovering, whenever the subject was brought up, my friend became emotionally unstable, and I never managed to find out what they saw when they turned around. After graduation, we drifted apart. As for the dog, it suffered severe agitation, biting indiscriminately and foaming at the mouth before collapsing repeatedly. It's a pitiful story, but they had to be euthanized. In the end, I don't know what that thing was, and I don't want to know. Anyway, I won't go near the sea. This concludes my colleague's story. Wriggle, wriggle. This is about when I visited my grandmother's ancestral home in Akita during my childhood. I only visited her house once a year, during the annual Oben festival. Arriving at my grandmother's house, I immediately rushed outside to play with my older brother, full of excitement. The air there was vastly different from the city, refreshingly crisp. Basking in the refreshing breeze, I and my brother dashed around the rice fields. As the sun rose and reached its zenith at noon, the wind suddenly ceased. Just as I thought the wind had stopped, a strangely warm breeze started blowing, making me feel uncomfortable. I grumbled, "It's already so hot. Why is this warm wind blowing?" My sense of exhilaration from earlier had been taken away by this unexpected warmth. My brother, however, had been looking in a different direction, towards a scarecrow in the field. When I asked him, "What's up with that scarecrow?" he replied, "No, it's beyond that," and continued staring intently. Curious, I followed his gaze to the far side of the rice field. Indeed, I could see something. What was that? Though it was hard to make out from a distance, there was a white object about the size of a person, wriggling and moving. And there was nothing around except for the rice fields. There was no one nearby. I thought for a moment, is that a new kind of scarecrow? Maybe someone from the farms came up with the idea since there's never been a moving scarecrow before. Perhaps it's being moved by the wind that's been blowing. My brother seemed to agree with my interpretation, but his expression changed suddenly. The wind had completely stopped. However, that white object was still wriggling. My brother exclaimed in surprise, "Hey! It's still moving. What on earth is that?" Seemingly driven by curiosity, he went back to the house, grabbed binoculars, and returned to the scene. With an excited tone, he said, "I'll take a look first. You wait here." He eagerly peered through the binoculars. Suddenly, his expression changed dramatically. His face turned pale within moments, cold sweat pouring down, and he eventually dropped the binoculars. Fearful of what my brother saw, I asked, "What was it?" He answered slowly, I don't know." His voice no longer sounded like his own. He walked back to the house, his steps unsteady. I tried to pick up the fallen binoculars to see what had terrified my brother, but his words had taken away my courage to look. Yet, I was curious. When viewed from a distance, that white object appeared strange, wriggling in an odd manner. It was slightly peculiar, but it didn't invoke more fear than that. However, my brother's reaction. "All right, I have to see for myself." What could have frightened my brother so much? I picked up the binoculars, determined to look. At that moment, my grandfather rushed over, his face filled with anxiety. Before I could ask, he urgently questioned, "What's wrong? Did you see it? Did you see it through those binoculars?" Even before I could respond, he continued, "You must never look at that thing. Did you see it?" I hesitated, then answered, "No. Not yet." With a slightly nervous expression, he sighed in relief and burst into tears right there. I was left bewildered, my mind filled with confusion. Upon returning home, I saw everyone crying. Was it because of me? No, it wasn't. Upon closer inspection, I realized that only my brother was laughing uncontrollably, wriggling like that white object, winding and unwinding in a frenzied dance. That sight filled me with a greater sense of dread than the strange white object itself. And on the day I left, my grandmother said this, "It might be better to leave your brother here. It's cramped over there, and given the ways of the world, he won't last more than a few days. Leave him here, and after a few years, release him back to the rice fields. That would be best." Upon hearing those words, I cried out in a loud voice. My brother's former self was gone, forever gone. Even if I were to meet him again during next year's visit, he would no longer be the same. Why did this happen? We had been playing together so happily until just recently. What? Desperately wiping away tears, I got into the car and left the ancestral home. As I drove away, my grandfather and others waved goodbye. Amidst them, my brother, now completely transformed, briefly appeared to wave at me. While fading into the distance, I tried to see my brother's expression through the binoculars. He was definitely crying. His expression was smiling, but it was a sad smile, a first and last of its kind. And then, as I turned a corner, my brother vanished from sight. Tears streamed down my face as I continued looking through the binoculars. Someday, he'll return to his old self, I thought, reminiscing about my brother, while gazing over the vast expanse of green rice fields. As I looked through the binoculars, lost in my memories of my brother. That's when it happened. Wriggle, wriggle. How was it? If you have any other stories you would like me to introduce or any questions about the stories, please leave a comment. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and stay tuned for the next episode. Bonus episode. The following is not a ghost story, but a story from my own experiences. In Japan, being a small island nation with diverse landscapes, natural disasters have been frequent and have greatly influenced its history up to the present day. As a result, there's a belief that something mysterious beyond human comprehension, such as gods or yokai, dwells in nature, mountains, rivers, and the sea. Many folk traditions of this nature have been preserved. But is that the only reason? In my lifetime, I found happiness in activities like mountain climbing, camping, cooling off by the river, and playing in nature. Even as a child, I lived in an area with a shrine nearby, surrounded by a large forest. This shrine was famous for capturing rare insects like stag beetles at night. However, it was strictly forbidden to go there after dark in the local community. Nonetheless, as children often do, I and 4 of my neighborhood friends managed to slip away secretly. We were only 4 in the end as one friend didn't show up. After waiting for a while, we speculated that our parents might have caught them, and we decided to proceed. We said, if they don't tell on us, we're fine. Whispering this, we ventured toward the shrine in the middle of the night. Upon arriving at the shrine, an eerie chill and a strange sensation of mist, despite the darkness, enveloping the area greeted us. Then, one of us shone a flashlight ahead and saw something. A black mist illuminated by the light was swaying gently, almost silently. I can't recall how much time passed, but eventually, the mist took on a humanoid form and began swaying towards us. We should run, I thought, but my body wouldn't move. It's over, I thought, just as the person holding the flashlight dropped it. In that instant, we all started running frantically, not caring about each other, racing back home. I wondered if everyone made it back safely. With these thoughts, I eventually went to sleep. The next day, when we headed to school, all 4 of us were there. We encouraged each other, relieved that everyone seemed unharmed. I started talking, it's not fair that the one who didn't show up is off the hook, but suddenly, my friends stared blankly at me. They all started asking, who? There's no way that's possible. They should know. After all, it was him who initiated the idea. As an extra part, I've included my personal experience this time. What do you think the black mist was? Do you believe there was really a friend who invited me? Or could I have been dreaming? I don't know now. If you're willing, I would be delighted if you could share your thoughts in the comments. That's all for now.